privacy as a public figure, privacy for visa holders, offsite backup considerations, and Cirkul water bottles. Welcome to the Surveillance Report 181 Q&A, where we are answering questions from our amazing patrons who help us make this podcast and help us offset some of the time that we spend on this, because it is a lot. You can view and join the questions on patreon.com/surveillancepod. There's a link in the description, and we really appreciate you guys. So we're going to start off with a question from Banana, who says, I am in the process of entering the so-called public sphere as a writer, and I'm curious how to handle online privacy whilst having my true identity also online. My writing will bridge the two worlds through in-person events, open mics, etc. But in addition, I will do online tutorial type of content, my website, maybe a podcast, so on and so forth. This, it would seem, will make online privacy somewhat of an impossibility, and having a pseudonym wouldn't make sense for me because I'm not going to hide my name from all the people I meet in person. Perhaps this leaves me in a position where security is more important than privacy, like protecting your home address, accounts, and phone numbers. I guess my main question is, how does a public figure with their real identity, also public and online, maintain privacy and security? I imagine a lot of people with businesses are in this position as well. Any tips on what to do before entering such a relationship with the world? Thanks. So first of all, obligatory, The New Oil does have a guide for content creators. If you go to the front page, thenewoil.org, scroll to the bottom, we have a handful of quick start guides. You can find it there. My second question is, why wouldn't a pseudonym make sense? I say that as someone who uses a pseudonym, and it is starting to get a little confusing and messy. I'm not going to lie. As The New Oil grows and as my real life and The New Oil start to converge a little more, it is difficult to know, like, what name do I use and when? But I think it is something you can navigate. And I know some people, it's like really important, like your name is tied to your sense of identity. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's like clothes. Like, I'm a jeans and a t-shirt kind of guy, but if I wear a suit, does that somehow change who I am? I think it helps to have that separation. You know, when people look up Brandon McNulty, an author, like let's say that's your pseudonym. If people look that up, then they're not going to find Banana, or at least not as easily. It still creates that bit of separation, which I think is actually useful because especially as you're starting out, when people look you up, they're not going to find your home address and your day job and all this stuff. They're going to find your writing first, theoretically. I definitely, obviously, as a privacy person, I do think you should still worry about data removal, securing your accounts and stuff like that. But I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think they're incompatible personally.
I guess I would start similarly of asking, you're not going to hide your name from the people you meet in person. And I guess that's a choice you're making. So if you don't want to hide your name, then yeah, I agree pretty much with everything that you've already shared, which is now you're in a position where security is going to be more important than privacy. You're publicizing some area of your life, which includes your name and things that you believe in, and it involves your true identity. And so at that point, you're now going to have to be someone who prioritizes a little bit more security than privacy. That's where you're going to be looking at things like maybe relying a little bit more on certain companies and certain products to help ensure your security, and offloading a little bit of that risk to other people who can properly protect you better than you can. That's really all I have to say to this. I think you're actually on the right path if this is what you want to do, but you got to make sure whatever you pick that you understand the implications of what you choose to do. All right, and the next question is from Mr. Camel999, who's one of our regulars. Always happy to have a question from him or them. But it's for Henry, which is me. It's due to me knowing he's a runner, which I am. What's your opinion of the Cirkul water bottles that have the flavor cartridges? They've surprisingly enjoyed it for their workouts. Swimming, not running, but kind of similar. Have you tried it? If not, are you interested in the concept? I had to look it up, and I've been kind of like going back and forth and looking into this while we were recording. I'm actually someone who doesn't really use any of these products. I really like Stacy Sims. Stacy Sims does a lot of women first research on especially athletes. She used to be an Ironman athlete. She actually had this heat stroke, even though she followed all the instructions to the T, and she pretty much learned that all the recommendations are designed around men and not women. So she researches women, but a lot of her advice actually does apply to men as well. And one of them is hydration, and she's a very big proponent, and she dives into how to properly hydrate as an athlete. And one thing she talks about, which I've actually implemented, is just adding a little bit of table salt to my water throughout the day. And then just making sure I'm eating a well-balanced diet, which includes all the electrolytes from the diet, because most electrolytes, with the exception of sodium, you can actually get from your diet. She also talks about how you can get like some simple carbs before your workout. Like 45 minutes before, I'll mix a little bit of maple syrup into some water with some sodium. And that's pretty much most of what you need. I looked into Cirkul, and it seems like their target is people who don't like water and they just need a way to get fluid in, and this is better than soda and better than a lot of other alternatives, which I think is fair. So if you're that person and you don't want to waste bottles, and then I think it's all relative to where you're coming from. If you're someone who's like drinking Coca-Cola every day and you're trying to transition to something that's a little bit more sustainable and a little bit better for you, then I think this is great. If you're someone who's already doing something better than this, then maybe not. I will say I recently found something called Switchel, which is kind of a sports drink that farmers used to drink in like the 1900s or something like that. But they kind of made a sports drink version of that, which is homemade. If you type in no meat athlete Switchel, they have a little recipe that I've been playing with the last week. It's pretty much like Concord grape juice. It tastes like the grape Gatorade, but you make it from home, and it's got just, I think, 4 ingredients in it. Stuff to play with, just do whatever works for you.
Here's what I have to contribute to the conversation. I am a sugar addict. Like, I've pretty much given up. And I know sugar is terrible from a human perspective, health perspective, everything perspective. Sugar is like the worst thing we've ever discovered. I noticed years ago, if I don't have any sugar until the afternoon, I'm good. So like if I have a soda with lunch, but I don't have any soda before noon, 99% of the time, I'll just have that one soda at lunch and I'll be good. If I have a soda in the morning, like if I have a Mountain Dew for breakfast as my caffeine instead of coffee, I'm just going to drink soda all day long. So as one of those people who's like hopelessly addicted to sugar, and it's not the carbonation before anyone says, try carbonated water. I do like carbonated water, but it's the sugar. It's not the carbonation. For those out there who maybe haven't figured that out, try that whole water thing. It's like, don't have a soda or like any sugar or anything until the afternoon. See if that helps. I also, personally, I've noticed I just like cold water. Like if it's ice cold water, I'll drink it.
The only thing I'd caution people with that is most sodas have a substantial amount of caffeine, so I wouldn't drink them within 8 hours of sleeping. And actually, this is where they really get you. Original Coca-Cola has a lot less caffeine than Diet Coke does, as does Coke Zero.
Really?
Because there has to be something addictive. And so diet sodas normally have a lot more caffeine than non-diet sodas because non-diet sodas have sugar in them.
John has our next question, and they ask, how does your privacy advice differ for international students and other temporary visa holders in the US? From my understanding, the NSA and other spy agencies are not allowed to collect data on their own citizens, which would exclude the group mentioned above. Does this have any practical privacy implications? I want to say yes and no. So this is me kind of shooting off the cuff here. I don't really have any sources for this. First of all, the NSA and other spy agencies will bend over backwards through flaming hoops to find loopholes. So for example, I dated someone from Australia for a while, for about 6 months. Every single one of my messages got caught up in the NSA's net. I have zero doubt because that person was Australian. And my messages left the border. Edward Snowden talks about in an interview with John Oliver that if Google moves your emails to another server overseas, even just temporarily for a few minutes to do some maintenance, that gets caught up in their net, even though everything in that inbox may have been domestic. They will share with other agencies. Joseph Cox from 404 is actually pushing his book Anom right now. So I've heard like several podcasts with him on it. The book is called Dark Wire. It's about Anom. He mentions that like because America and Australia were kind of teamed up for this operation, both countries are not supposed to spy on their own citizens, but we can spy on Australians and Australians can spy on us, or Australia can spy on us. And then we can just, happen to share the data as like two collaborating partners. So they will find any excuse they possibly can to even remotely justify this. So I don't think it matters if you're international, domestic, if you're using domestic services, it doesn't matter. They will find an excuse. On the other hand, yes, I do think it matters because as a non-American, and I think this applies to any country for the record, you're sus. Like from the government's perspective, we're going to put extra scrutiny on you. I hope to move overseas someday, and I fully expect that I will be on the government's radar, not because I did anything or not even because of the new oil, but just because I am a foreigner in their country. And no matter how many years I'm there, I think there will just be that natural, like if something goes wrong, I will be maybe not first on the list, but I'm probably somewhere on the list of like people to look into as an outsider. I mean, is anyone specifically looking at you? Probably not. Hopefully not. Kind of depends on a lot of factors there. But yeah, I do think as a foreigner, you are probably under some additional scrutiny. But at the same time, I don't think being domestic makes you any safer.
Yeah, I think it's worth reminding people, we covered a story recently that actually showed how agencies within the US, I believe it included I don't know if it was the FBI or the NSA, but pretty much they covered how even within the US, they weren't supposed to collect direct data from US citizens, and they were doing that.
FBI.
There you go, it's the FBI. And
I vaguely remember that, yeah.
I wouldn't assume the NSA is any different, mainly because we've seen stories like this in the past now. And the fact that you're a foreigner within the US, I think actually makes you in some ways more suspicious. Not that I think that's okay or anything like that, but I just think that's the reality. I think that you're under more scrutiny. And I think most countries are like that. You know, if you're someone who's on a visa, I feel like countries are a little bit more wary of you because they don't know who you are and all these kind of things. And that's why they have such heavy requirements in certain countries for this kind of stuff. So I'd say most of the privacy implications and like the practical advice that I could give are actually pretty applicable. It's pretty global. We try to keep our advice somewhat global, and where we kind of fall short is not knowing services that exist in other places and not knowing the nuances and the legal differences between countries, because we can only know so much and we live in the US. But generally speaking, I kind of agree. Like, I don't think that you're any safer in any particular country unless there's a situation where there's some kind of like legal law enforcement request that, you know, might happen because you're using a service that's within your country or something like that. That's a situation where maybe there's some advantages to doing certain things. But I think just on a mass scale, I don't think there's a massive difference. 2 questions from What's in a Name. The first one is, what are your thoughts on a dual WAN? Both fail over. If ISP1 cuts out, it goes to ISP2. And balancing. Packets go between them based on QoS with a VPN. My setup supports it, and I'm debating how effective it would be. The VPN would know both of my IPs, but I don't see an increased risk over them only having one IP. I'm just going to come forward and say this isn't something I've looked into, and I don't have much information on this, unfortunately. So I'm going to move that over to Nate's court if he has anything to add here.
I feel like I've heard of it, but I also don't have a lot of experience. But in answer to your question, I agree with you. You're already placing an immense amount of trust in your VPN provider. And that's why it's so important to go with one that you do trust. So I agree. Like, I don't see the difference if they know one IP, both IPs, all IPs, half your traffic, all your traffic. I mean, if you're trusting them, I mean, I guess in the last one, half your traffic, all your traffic, depends on what traffic you're trusting them with. But if you're trusting them with one thing, I don't see the issue, at least in this case. Yeah, like, I agree with you. I don't see the issue.
The second question is, what are your thoughts on having some traffic unencrypted so you don't stand out as much? Think Dwight from The Office when he's writing in his notebook to keep secrets from his computer. First off, I don't know if what you're saying unencrypted, if you mean outside the VPN tunnel, or if you mean actually unencrypted. And if you mean actually unencrypted, I have very few situations where I think you should be compromising security for something as basic as encryption. I think, especially nowadays, most people are using some form of encryption in most forms of communication, which includes end-to-end encryption with messengers even. Like in the US, I'd say a lot of people use iMessage or something like Facebook Messenger, which might not even be end-to-end encrypted, but it's still encrypted and has TLS. And then all around the world, most people use WhatsApp, which is end-to-end encrypted. And so when it comes to accessing websites, you're probably using SSL certs or TLS and all these different things. So I don't know what or how you would choose what to leave unencrypted and what your goal would be. I don't know what kind of methodology you would apply to try to achieve any kind of goal. I don't know where I would start with that question. So no, I think that this might actually be rooted in kind of a false assumption of how you could try to not stand out as much. I think that you're better off just hiding the traffic. And if you need to not stand out as much, use tools that are specifically designed for that, like Tor and Mulvad browser and other tools that specifically are designed to blend you in with other people. I don't think that's a task that you should assign to yourself, especially if you're asking about it. Then I don't think you're going to accomplish what you're trying to do. Okay,
so first of all, I'm about to cut our subscribership in half. I've only ever seen like 3 episodes of The Office, and that was back when I was trying to give it a chance. And it's not for me. I know, like, skip the first season, whatever. It's not for me. So I don't even understand this reference of like writing in his notebook to keep secrets. I know who Dwight is. I think largely the whole like blending in thing, I think is kind of overrated. I think there's specific situations where it makes sense, like the idea of like the Tor browser, for example, or the Mulvad browser, where, you know, you're trying to blend in with a bunch of other people for fingerprinting reasons. I think if you have specific targeted adversaries, like if you actually have an FBI surveillance van or, you know, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but like a domestic abuser or somebody who is like specifically singling you out, then yes, I think it does benefit you to try to blend in, try to look normal, try not to stand out. But if you're talking about like automated mass surveillance, like targeted advertising and data collection, I don't think they give a shit. If 990 people out of 10,000 are visiting this website and they're fingerprintable and they're trackable and we can get everything in the kitchen sink, I don't think they care about the 10 people who aren't doing it. And unfortunately, that is still the situation we're in with privacy. So many people are still like downloading an app and thinking that now they're suddenly anonymous. I think so many people are doing that it's just like we don't care about the handful of people who are actually private.
The only thing I'm going to add to this is I always go back to hypothetical versus real risks. There are real risks to using a browser that doesn't have an ad blocker, that doesn't have any kind of privacy protections in place, that doesn't do anything to protect your IP address, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a million hypothetical risks when it comes to fingerprinting. I think for most people, they don't need to be concerned with fingerprinting unless that their threat model requires that, which I can tell you, not even for me it does. Despite that, I still use Mulvad because I believe in privacy. I still use Tor because I believe in privacy, and I still like to benefit from it and help other people because me using those tools helps other people. But you have to remember hypothetical versus real risks. Frankly, not even like the top people fully agree on how to deal with. So I think it's a little bit ambitious to think that you can deal with this yourself when not even top experts can agree on how to deal with this issue. So I think that it's good to hand over that trust to people who know what they're doing, and they are what we know to be the most trusted solutions out there, which is like Tor and all these other projects that we covered that try to blend people in together.
Let's move on to David Johnson, our last question. And as always, you leave very detailed questions, so thank you. What are your favorite options for offsite backups for disaster recovery where being able to rapidly restore the most recent version possible is not the main concern? So in other words, it's if it takes you a couple days to get back up and running, not a big deal. Or at least that's how I understood your question. Please let me know if I'm mistaken. So you go on to say, on the one hand, it seems that cloud-based solutions are the easiest option, but they can be limited, especially for larger backups. It might take a long time to upload them. In addition, it's not always clear how safely these companies store your data, specifically from things like ransomware and equipment failure. On the other hand, it's possible, and in most cases probably cheaper, to simply purchase an external storage. However, then the issue becomes how to move it offsite in a cost-effective way. You say, how do you and people you know in the privacy and security community deal with this issue? I like that question. How do you and people you know? I haven't had this conversation with a lot of people, but I'd be down to have this conversation because I think there's probably a lot of ways to go about this, and I'm sure a lot of people have really good ideas. So I can tell you what I do, and Henry can tell you what he does, and I'm not going to turn this one over to the community. I know we do that a lot, but yeah, by all means, people listening, feel free to leave your ideas in the comments because, like I said, there's probably a million ways to do this. For offsite backups, I have a few options. One of them is currently I am cursed with a day job that is not remote, and I do go to the office with regularity. So what I can do is I can get a really big thumb drive or a hard drive. I guess this depends on how often you do backups. I do my own weekly backups, basically, is what I'm trying to say. In my case, I can take the hard drive home or the thumb drive home on the weekend, do my backup, put it back in my desk on Monday. In the past, when my band did weekly practices, me and the guitar player always carpooled. So I would give him a copy of my hard drive, and it was always encrypted, so I don't care if he has it. I think the main question here, as with anything else, is threat modeling. So in my situation, I'm basically worried about my home. My office is far enough away that if my home burns down, the office is probably not going to burn down the same night. That would be pretty crazy. If my home flooded, again, my guitar player lives far enough away that he's in the same town, but it's probably not going to flood. I do live in Texas. Tornadoes, I'm actually not super worried about those because, I mean, the thumb drive will be somewhere, although I guess I might never find it. But again, guitarist lives far enough away that he probably won't be hit. He'll probably text me and be like, hey, are you okay? And to which I will be like, I don't have a phone. But you know what I mean? It's kind of going through that same threat modeling of like, what are you trying to protect against and what feasibly works? And I think in the case of like a family and a friend who lives somewhere else, if things go south, just pick someone else. Not to oversimplify or not to play fast and loose, but what are the odds? What are the odds that the same weekend that you and this friend have a falling out is the same weekend that your computer dies and you need to restore the backups? It's pretty low. But if you want, you could have two friends. Again, Henry mentioned this in the last question. It goes down to like the what if. We could play the what if game all day. What if all three of them? What if one of them's in a car accident? But my point is just to walk through the kind of threat modeling on that one.
I think if trust is an issue, just to expand on your thing, you could leave an encrypted backup with a friend and then give like the password to it to someone else. Just an idea.
Real quick on that one, you could split up the password. I know Michael Basil has talked about that one as like, his lawyer has half the password, his sister, whoever has the other half.
I used to do more manual stuff and I really stopped because I just don't want to deal with it. It's really boring and it felt really tedious and I didn't want to have to worry about it or think about it. So I actually have automatic backups to my NAS, and then my NAS has automatic cloud backups that are end-to-end encrypted, zero knowledge. And I have my recovery methods, and pretty much I've set it up so that I never store data directly on my devices at this point. It almost always directly goes to my NAS, or it goes to an end-to-end encrypted cloud provider. So that means that I'm comfortable with my devices getting stolen at any point in time. I'm fine with them getting thrown in the ocean. I can just go home and I have a way to pretty much get access to everything again. And if the home burns down too, then there's still ways to get access to it. So, and it's all automated. It's done literally right now as we're talking. I'm sure something's being backed up as we speak. And it took me a long time to find a workflow I enjoyed, but I think the NAS really helped enable that workflow for me. So that's one option for people who want the more automated route. Sometimes it's nice to have like a physical thing that I know is there and it's backed up and I did it manually, but I don't miss the hassle.
Those were all our questions this week. Maintaining your privacy as a public figure and considerations for that. Likewise, considerations for Visa holders and their privacy. Dual WAN options and blending in with your online traffic. Offsite backup considerations. A lot of considerations here. And Cirkul water. No considerations there, just questions. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for asking questions. We really do appreciate your questions and each and every one of you supporting the podcast. We really couldn't do it without you guys. This is very much a labor of love, and your positive feedback, your constructive criticism, your questions, it all, gives us the power to keep on going. But Patreon is what pays the bills, replaces broken equipment, helps us upgrade equipment, all that kind of fun stuff. So if you are not already on Patreon and you want to ask us a question, feel free to join the Q&A. Again, the link is in the description, patreon.com/surveillancepod. And we look forward to taking more of your questions, getting to know more of you guys. And we'll see you this coming weekend with Surveillance Report 182.